What's going on, Not Move Nation? Welcome to the Not Move podcast. Today is November 6th at 2:04 p.m. Eastern Time. We have Thursday night football on tonight between the Las Vegas Raiders and the Denver Broncos. This game's being played at Denver. The Las Vegas Raiders are 8-2 all time against Denver. Yes, the Las Vegas Raiders. But Denver has won 2 in a row against Las Vegas. Geno Smith has a 3-1 career record against Denver. Bo Nix has a 2-0 career record against the Las Vegas Raiders. And then Sean Payton, the head coach for the Denver Broncos, has a 4-3 head-to-head record against Pete Carroll, the coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. Peyton has a 4-1 career record over Carroll in the regular season. So 2 of Carroll's wins came in the playoffs. One moment, please. Thank you. Las Vegas is 3-5 against the spread this season. Denver's 4-1 against the spread this season. Right now, I'm seeing that Denver is favored by 9.5 points. I thought it was 8.5. Let me go look again. Let me try to update the system here. Denver favored by 9.5. That's what I'm seeing on this book. And so Denver has the better record against the spread this season than the Raiders do. Denver carries a 7-2 record into this matchup. The Raiders carry a 2-6 record. What's going on, Ivan? Thanks for joining. Injuries. Marvin Mims, wide receiver for the Broncos, is out today. Let me bring up the reasoning behind that. 1 second, please. But Marvin Mims is out, wide receiver for Denver. Let's go here real quick. Let's see what's going on with him. Concussion. So he's out. Wide receiver for the Broncos. Nate Adkins, tight end for the Broncos. I think he's a backup tight end, the second string. But he is out with a knee issue. At least whenever I looked at the Denver Broncos depth chart earlier on ESPN.com, they had Nate Adkins listed as the backup tight end, the second string tight end. And I just verified that that's what he's listed as. 20 minutes left on my break, so I'm going to just put in the comments now who I need help with. Right on, man. Yeah, we can get to it. Pat Surtain out for the Broncos, cornerback, defensive player, pretty big. And then Jacoby Myers, one of the Vegas Raiders' biggest receiving threats, just recently got traded to Jacksonville, so he obviously won't be in this game. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm not going to overthink this one. I like the Broncos minus the 9.5. That'll be my favorite play in this game. I just see too many advantages for the Broncos. A big passing advantage, big rushing advantage, a good-sized third down conversion advantage, a big red zone conversion advantage, a big red zone attempts per game advantage, a big sacks on the quarterback advantage, and a slight turnover differential advantage. I think where Denver really separates themselves from other teams is the offensive and really defensive lines. Denver allows the fewest sacks per game to their quarterback, and they get the most sacks per game to the opposing quarterbacks. And right now, Vegas ranks 21st in sacks allowed to their quarterback. So they are getting sacked more times per game than league average, going up against the top team in the sacks department per game this season. Bo Nix, 2 passing touchdowns. R.J. Harvey, 15 yards receiving, and a Raiders team total under 16.5 and under 21.5 first half. Okay, let's dive into it. Bo Nix, passing yards. When I looked, not passing yards, passing touchdowns. Okay, let's go take a look. Let's go look and see how many passing touchdowns the Raiders have allowed this season to opposing teams. They actually have allowed the fourth fewest. Bo Nix 2+ touchdown passes. Raiders have allowed the fourth fewest passing TDs to QBs this season. And then when we go look at Bo Nix game log, Bo Nix versus the Raiders last season, he had 2 touchdown passes in that game and 2 touchdown passes in both of those games. So that's good history there, 2 for 2 in touchdown passes. I think there's a bigger likelihood of him throwing, of maybe him throwing the touchdown passes if it's a competitive game. I mean, I don't think if the Broncos are up by a large margin in the third quarter, if he's going to be slinging it a whole lot. But, how many times has he had 2+ touchdown passes this season? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 9 games. I'd have to lean towards Bo Nix getting that. I am concerned if Denver gets ahead by too much, but I'll have to lean towards him getting there. 2 passing touchdowns. RJ Harvey, 15+ yards receiving. I was just talking with my buddy who's a Broncos fan, and he's telling me that Harvey is doing pretty good in that receiving game. Now, the Raiders have allowed the 9th fewest receiving yards to running backs this season, but let's go check out Harvey, 15+ receiving yards. It's tougher for me to pinpoint what these rookies are going to do just because I don't have a lot of historical data on them. But he's gone over that line, 15+ receiving yards in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 9 games this season. So that's looking good. 5 out of 9 games. And then how many targets is he seeing? Sometimes 1, sometimes upwards to 5. And he doesn't have any history against the Raiders. I mean, I have to think that Denver may call a higher percentage of rushing plays in this game, just by the way I think the game's going to go. And then target share we can look at real quick. Kansas City, Denver, or Denver, we're looking at their target share. I think with Mims being out, that could give Harvey a little bit more targets. He does lead the Denver running back corps in target share and receptions and receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. So I like that. How many games has Mims been out? Is this his first game out? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, this looks like his first game out. He only had 1 target against Dallas. My guess is he got injured in the Dallas game. Mims versus Cowboys. Injury. Concussion during a kickoff. During a kick return. What quarter was that in? On a kickoff return late in the fourth quarter. Okay. And what did? Okay, so Mims didn't play against Houston. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right. So Mims didn't play against Houston. And Harvey had 5 targets in that game against Houston. And receiving yards allowed to running backs by Houston this season is right there with the Raiders. So I'm gonna have to lean towards Harvey going over that. I think, once again, the Mims being out could give him a few more looks, and we saw Harvey go over that line, and he actually had the most receiving yards he's had all season and the most receptions all season in that game against Houston. And the Raiders have allowed 7 fewer yards than Houston has receiving to running backs this season. Receptions, the Raiders have allowed 4 more receptions. So I'm liking what I'm seeing there. Raiders team total under 16.5 is the question here. So let's go take a look. We'll just do this real quick. Points per game, NFL. We'll look at a couple of things for that. Points per game in the NFL. How many points per game are the Raiders scoring on the road this season? 12.5 per game. 12.5 points per game on the road. The Broncos, points allowed per game, NFL. By the way, I just want to mention while I'm looking this up, the last time the Broncos played Geno Smith, Geno played for Seattle, and there were the Broncos forced 2 safeties against Seattle in that game. If you're interested in maybe like a safety prop or something, you have that in your favor. I'm not saying I necessarily like it or dislike it, but, I did see that. But Denver, opponent points per game when they're at home, 17.8. So we'll take the 12.5 calculator. 12.5 plus 17.8. Divide that by 2, get about 15.15 points. 15.15. So, I'm thinking the Raiders score somewhere between, right around 15 points. 15, 16, and then maybe 14. But let's also look at Raiders versus Broncos history. And let's just go see how many times the Las Vegas Raiders were in Denver and scored, what was it, 16, 17 or more points. The last meeting they did at Denver, the last 2 meetings at Denver they did, the last 3 meetings at Denver they did, the last 4 meetings, the last 5 meetings. So every single time the Las Vegas Raiders, we had that name change. Every time the Las Vegas Raiders have traveled to Denver, they have put up 17 or more points. So, let's add those numbers together. The 18, and let's find an average there. 18 plus. I hear the mode might be better, the median, but we're going to do average here. 18 plus 17 plus 22 plus 34 plus 32 divided by what? How many games is that? 5. So 24.6 is what they're averaging at Denver since they became the Las Vegas Raiders. So if we take 24.6, add that to the 15.15 with that calculation that we just did earlier, and then divide that by 2, we're getting about 19.8 points. So 20 points for the Raiders. So, my gut instinct is telling me that the Raiders score like 13 points. But, that equation is kind of telling me that the Raiders are going to go over that amount. But, let's add it with 13. I mean, I don't really want to put my gut feeling into this a whole lot. I just wanted to give you the numbers. And, based on all that, I'm seeing that the Raiders get about 20 points in this one. But it's scary to take the under team total. Do I use Outlier Pro? No. Seems like sharps are heavy on Raiders spread plus 10, 10.5. What is Outlier Pro? Outlier Pro. Player prop betting tool. Okay, cool. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, I know there are a lot of different, things out there, tools out there that can help. And Yeah, I think if you use that with watching this show and some other resources and stuff, I think you can come up with the best educated decision for these games for sure. Um, I'm not too hip into those tools that you're talking about, but something that I'll look into. What else here? I think you had another question here. I mean, I like the under on the team total, but yeah, based on that calculation we did, it's telling me over. And then under 21 and a half first half. It's the best betters, I swear. The pro is expensive, but it's helped me so much this year. I subscribed in like March, 500 plus a year ago. Nice. I'll definitely check that out, man. Let me write that down here, and I'll look into it after the show here. Um, Outlier Pro, cool. Pro, sweet. Okay. And then first half. I mean, I don't really know about the first half. So in the first half, I think that would require diving into each box score. I know you're limited on time. Um, Diving into each box score and looking at how many times these teams have scored over that or under that amount in every game that they've ever played in Denver. Um, and I'm sure there are tools out there that give you an over or a first half ATS against the spread NFL. And I know the ones that I was looking at earlier, this EV analytics. I think you got to pay something for that information. But let me double check here. First half. I'm not looking for spread. I'm looking for first half totals. Yes, it's wanting me to log in, create an account, and all that stuff. Um, so yeah, I'm not too hip on the first half stuff. It would take a lot of your time up. Oh, it's okay. It's all right, Ivan. You have to go back now, but you'll be listening in. Okay, cool, man. I appreciate the questions. I'll do the best I can to go back and address the over under 21 and a half first half. Okay. But I'm going to talk about some other stuff here for a minute. Let's see here. Some props that I was looking at. With Jacoby Myers being traded from the Raiders recently, I think the main guys now are going to be Trey Tucker. I mean Brock Bowers. You know those two guys really. So I was looking at, and I think that the Raiders are going to be forced to pass the ball a little bit in this game if they are trailing near the later stages of the game, which I am projecting happens. The Raiders rank 13th in passing play percentage, so they are calling a higher percentage of passing plays than league average. And the Broncos have allowed the eighth most receptions to wide receivers this season. Trey Tucker over under 3.5 receptions. He's gone over that in 2 out of 3 career games against Denver. And with Myers recently traded, he leads the team in target share, Trey Tucker. And then when we look at, Trey Tucker game log, how many times has he had 4 or more receptions this season? 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 8 games. So I think that's a pretty interesting prop. Now, he has not scored a touchdown in 3 career games against Denver, but I think that prop is looking interesting. Trey Tucker over the 3.5 receptions. Also, Tyler Lockett. I did mention that the Broncos, they have a good defense, but they have allowed the 8th most receptions to wide receivers this season. And not only has Lockett gone over 1.5 receptions in 3 out of 4 career games against Denver, but this year He's gone over the 1.5 reception line in 3 games out of 8, which isn't as good as Trey Tucker's. So I'd have to lean more towards Trey Tucker going over that. Also, they have another receiver, but I didn't see a line for him on receptions. Maybe you guys do now. If you do, Jack Beck, I think it's worth looking into if you guys see any reception props for him. And then, Bowers, man. He's the second leader on Las Vegas in target share. I was talking with my buddy before I got on the live stream, and him and I were like, well, how are the Raiders going to move the ball tonight? How are they going to get it done? And we both just naturally feel like it's got to be Bowers. I mean, he was targeted 13 times, 12 receptions 4 days ago against Jacksonville. But one has to wonder, is he going to be tired? Playing on short rest like that? Is he going to get that much volume again? Now Bowers, the Broncos have allowed the 8th fewest receptions to tight ends. So if I were going to go with a Bowers prop, I would be leaning more towards receiving yards. The Broncos didn't rank in the top 10 or bottom 10 in receiving yards allowed to tight ends this season. And Bowers has scored a touchdown in 1 out of 2 career games against Denver. If you're interested in that, that's not a lot of history. But we can also go look to see where Denver has been, most vulnerable relative to other teams in the league at allowing a touchdown to a specific position. They've done good at limiting the tight end touchdowns. They've only allowed 3 this season, which is good compared to league average. They've allowed the fewest. They've allowed fewer receiving touchdowns to wide receivers, 2, which teams have allowed a lot more receiving touchdowns to wide receivers than tight ends this season. So, but with Surtain out, maybe that's a little bit more plausible tonight. And then let's see, running back rushing touchdowns. I mean, they've only allowed 4. What about receiving touchdowns to running backs? They've allowed 3. So is Genty getting receiving touchdowns at all? Or anybody for this Raiders team? I mean, Genty has 3 receiving touchdowns this season. 1 against Jacksonville last week, 2 against Chicago. And before we really start thinking about who's going to score a touchdown for the Raiders, let's look at these red zone statistics. The Raiders are not doing a good job at getting into the red zone or converting in the red zone. And Denver's defense is good at preventing teams from getting into the red zone and converting when they're in the red zone. So I think if you guys have information to explosive plays and who on this Raiders team can have, an explosive play. But when I'm looking at the Broncos' opponent yards per completion, they're not allowing a huge chunk of yardage when teams are passing against them or rushing against them. So I don't think this defense has allowed too many explosive plays, and I don't know how many explosive plays the Raiders have had this season, but I wouldn't think that they have a lot because, they've scored the 4th fewest points per game out of every team this season. And it's just, it's tough for me to pinpoint who for the Raiders is going to score a touchdown because, I think it's got to go to one of those 2 guys, Bowers or Genty. I know that comes as a huge shock to everybody, but which one? I would say I would probably lean more towards Genty now that I'm looking at it a little bit more. He's getting some touchdowns here and there, And the Broncos seem just a little more vulnerable to rushing touchdowns to running backs and receiving, combined with receiving touchdowns to running backs, than they are really any other position. What about maybe Geno sneaking one in? Is that possible? The Broncos have allowed 2 rushing touchdowns to quarterbacks this season. The Chiefs have allowed the most with 5. And I have it in my notes here somewhere. I think I saw Geno has rushed for a touchdown, and I can find out real quick. Geno Smith versus Broncos statistics here. He's rushed for a touchdown in I thought I had that info down. I'll have to go look real quick. I think it was in one career game against Denver. He did have a rushing touchdown. So, and it was in his most recent game against Denver. 30 rushing yards for 1 touchdown. But, the Broncos, they've allowed the 4th fewest rushing yards to quarterbacks this season. So, I'm a little skeptical on Geno rushing yards. But, I mean, yeah, if I had to pick somebody to get in today, it'd probably be Genty and then Bowers and then Geno. But, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Raiders just come up with no touchdowns today. But I do have them getting 1, and I'll have to lean towards Genty getting that 1. Now, for the Broncos, for the Broncos, Bo Nix has had a rushing touchdown in 1 out of 2 career games against the Raiders. Dobbins has scored a touchdown in 1 out of 2 games against the Raiders. But I think the guys who I'd be looking for in this game to score touchdowns are going to be Sutton, Franklin, or Harvey. So when I'm looking at RJ Harvey's game log here on ESPN.com, he had so the Broncos have been in 2 games this season where they won by 10 plus points. They haven't lost. The most points the Broncos have lost by this season is 3. They've lost 2 games by exactly 1 point and exactly 3 points. Out of all of the other wins that they have, though, they have 7 wins this season, and in 2 of those games, they were decided by 10 plus points. And in those games, Harvey had a touchdown in both of those games. So makes me like Harvey to get a touchdown tonight, especially if we're thinking Denver wins this one by 10 plus points, which is what I'm liking. And so I like Harvey to get a touchdown in that regard. And then if we look at how many touchdowns the Raiders have allowed to they haven't allowed a receiving touchdown to a running back, so that takes away some upside. But they've allowed the 3rd most rushing touchdowns to running backs, which in that game against Dallas, he had 2 just a few days ago, 10 days ago or so. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. In that game against Cincinnati, he had 1 receiving touchdown. So, and then in both of those games, he had a receiving touchdown. So, Dallas has allowed 7 rushing touchdowns this season, whereas the Raiders have allowed 9. So he got 2 rushing touchdowns against Dallas. And then the Bengals was the other game. He didn't get a rushing touchdown against the Bengals, and this one's at home. Both of those games were at home too. But yeah, he didn't get a rushing touchdown against the Bengals. and they have allowed as many rushing touchdowns as the Raiders this season. But I mean, I think that looks good. But we don't have any history to go off of with R.J. Harvey. We do with Sutton and Franklin a little bit. But before I move on to those guys, I want to just see how vulnerable the Raiders are to rushing yards allowed per game. They rank 16th, so they're about average in rushing yards allowed per game. I mean, the Raiders' defense isn't terrible. They're a little bit more vulnerable to the pass than they are the rush in regards to yards allowed per game relative to all the other teams in the league. So, I think I think Denver's going to be able to run a little bit more tonight. And the Raiders rushing yards allowed to running backs, they haven't allowed a ton or a few. They're somewhere in that middle there. To be specific, they've allowed the 12th fewest. So they're not terrible at that. They're not terrible at that, and they haven't allowed a lot of receiving yards to running backs either. So maybe Denver's going to have to throw the ball a little bit more to Sutton and or Franklin, Evan Ingram. So let's talk about those guys a little bit. And before we start talking about touchdown scores for Denver, let's look at their red zone. Let's look at their red zone statistics. They rank 19th in red zone attempts per game, which isn't great, but it's not terrible either. It's slightly below league average. But the Raiders rank 28th in opponent red zone attempts per game. So teams are getting red zone scoring attempts often against the Raiders. And Denver is actually, when they get into the red zone, they rank 8th best in the NFL in converting touchdowns. And the Raiders rank 17th, so slightly below average in allowing teams to score touchdowns when they do enter the red zone against them. So I think, that's really where Denver can capitalize. Now, I would look at explosive plays too after the show is over. I didn't have time to look into explosive plays, but I think that's big. What if Denver's throwing 30, 40-yard touchdowns or breaking out for those runs, and the Raiders are allowing that? That red zone conversion rates and attempts per game doesn't take that into account. And my buddy was telling me that the Broncos were kind of getting some bigger plays, bigger touchdowns. But anyways, let's look at the red zone targets NFL. I believe it's Franklin who's leading this team in red zone targets when the Broncos are in that red zone. Yeah, and really, guys, Franklin is seeing as many. Troy Franklin, wide receiver for the Broncos, he is seeing as many red zone targets as Tucker Kraft, Tyler Warren. He has 12 red zone targets. Percentage of red zone targets, 34.3%. And that's more than what Tucker Kraft and Tyler Warren are seeing. So I think Franklin is definitely somebody to consider when looking at an anytime touchdown scorer. And the downside to it is that he hasn't had a touchdown in 2 career games against the Raiders. But has he ever had this type of workload? Probably. I don't think so. So yeah, and he not just leads the team in targets in the red zone, but he leads this team in target share. So I think he's kind of going under the radar here. Let me see if we have any other just topped on, but we'll be talking fantasy. Leaning at Genius anytime. On the over-under, Geno, anytime touchdown. Yeah, I was thinking that too, Tim. I think that's worth consideration. Did you already touch on the over-under? A little bit, not too much. We can go into that here in just a minute, though. For sure. We kind of broke down the Raiders team total. Naturally, I don't think the Raiders are going to score a whole lot in this game, but we did some calculations, and it seems like the Raiders, are going to score about 20 points in this game. I was looking at how many times the Las Vegas Raiders, not the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders have traveled to Denver and gone over their team total, which is set at 16.5. And every single time the Las Vegas Raiders has gone to Denver, they have scored 17 or more points. And they've gone to Denver 5 times since they have become the Las Vegas Raiders. So, and then, so I took the average of that, and then I added it with how many points per game is Las Vegas scoring on the road this season. How many points per game is Denver allowing at home? Find the average of that, and then I combine the two. And it looks like the Raiders, based on that equation, are going to score, about 20 points. But I don't know. I don't see it happening. But if you're into like math and stuff, that's what we came up with there, at least for the Raiders team total. We'll work on the Broncos and just the full game here in just a minute. I personally feel better with money lines and spreads than anything, but I like to talk about anything and everything. So Sutton, last that I checked, over under 58.5 receiving yards, and Franklin 44.5. Let's talk about Sutton for a second. So the Raiders allow the 8th most receiving yards to wide receivers this season and the 5th most receptions to wide receivers. Sutton, last that I checked, over under 58.5 receiving yards. He's gone over that line in 3 out of 8 career games against the Las Vegas Raiders. He's gone over that line in 2 out of 4 career games against the Oakland Raiders. So in all, he's gone over that line in 5 out of 12 career games against the Raiders. He has scored 1+ touchdowns in 4 out of 8 in half of his career games against the Las Vegas Raiders. Cortland Sutton has had a touchdown. He scored a touchdown in 1 out of 4 career games against Oakland. So all in all, same thing. 5 out of 12 career games against the Raiders, he has scored a touchdown. But when I looked at Cortland Sutton's split, so I'm looking at ESPN.com. I'm going to the splits column, and I'm looking at how many touchdowns does he have throughout the course of his career. How many touchdowns does he have at home versus away? Because I was telling my buddy, I was like, it feels like Sutton gets more touchdowns at home than he does the road. But I look back at last year, he had 5 on the road compared to 3 at home. Looking at 2023, 6 on the road, 4 at home. The year before that, 1-1. 1-1 the year before that. So I think it was only one game out of, or 1 year, his second year in the NFL, he had more touchdowns at home than the road, and that was his only season that he's ever done that. So it makes me a little more skeptical about Sutton tonight with the anytime touchdown. Naturally, I'm feeling that way, but the statistics really aren't aligning with it. And then when I'm looking at his receiving yardage this year, he's averaged more receiving yards on the road than home. Last year, he averaged more at home than the road. I'm just trying to see if there's any correlation here between if he's getting more receiving yards per catch at home versus the road. And it's kind of back and forth. So I don't see anything that is too helpful in trying to gauge whether or not he's going to have a better chance of picking up some receiving yards on average per catch in this one. But here's what I'll say about the Raiders, man. They're not allowing huge chunks of yardage whenever teams are completing the ball against them. They rank 14th in opponent yards per completion. So, they're not allowing huge gains per completion. Now, they may be allowing explosive plays. That I don't know. I think I'll try to look it up real quick for you guys. I'll try to go to this AI type thing here and just type in who has allowed the most explosive plays this season. Then I'll see if anybody has any questions or comments. The Cincinnati Bengals have allowed the Cincinnati Bengals have allowed the most explosive plays. If you want the next, I want the full rankings. I don't think it's getting what I want here with this AI search query. But if you guys have, access to that information, then I think that could be beneficial. What's the average over/under line you are seeing today? Right now, I'm seeing 42.5 on the total points scored in this game was the over/under. Was feeling parlay. Geno anytime, total under. Chargers minus 8.5. Yeah, I was thinking the Chargers too. This upcoming week, that looks pretty solid. They're playing the Steelers, and I haven't done a whole lot of research about that game specifically yet. But when I was gathering data for that game, I see that the Chargers rank 6th in passing yards per game this season, and Pittsburgh has allowed the most passing yards per game to opposing teams. So I think Justin Herbert could torch that Pittsburgh pass defense. But when I'm looking at Franklin, right? Looking at Franklin, Troy Franklin. We've already talked about him a little bit. I'd have to lean towards more Franklin getting a touchdown than Sutton. Although Sutton has better history against the Raiders. I just, we talked about how maybe we didn't talk about Franklin. Let me just go look real quick. Franklin. He had 2 touchdowns in that game against Denver, which was kind of a blowout win for the Broncos, and that's the game script I'm going with. I'm going with Broncos blow them out, and Franklin gets a touchdown and RJ Harvey get a touchdown. And there's pretty good correlation between the two games that the Broncos won by 10-plus points this year and those guys scoring. Now, Franklin didn't get one against Cincinnati. But let's just go see real quick where the Raiders have allowed the most, touchdowns. I think we already looked it up with the rushing. Receiving, they've allowed 9 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers. What about tight ends? They've done good at limiting tight end touchdowns. So I'm thinking really the most plausible situation for Denver to get into the end zone is going to be the Raiders have allowed the 3rd most rushing touchdowns to running backs. So really, Dobbins or Harvey. Wouldn't be surprised to see both of them get in. Now, Dobbins, we mentioned, has scored in 1 out of 2 career games against the Raiders. What about... Here's the thing, man, is if Denver gets up Did Dobbins score in any of those games where it was a blowout against Cincinnati or Dallas? He didn't score one against Cincinnati, and he didn't score one against Dallas. So that's why I'm a little worried about J.K. Dobbins getting in the end zone, and I'd lean a little bit more towards R.J. Harvey. So it just kind of depends on what kind of game script that you're going with. Under Geno anytime. Broncos minus 8.5. Honestly, may add R.J. Harvey anytime. Yeah, I like that, man. And the under. That's what I'm naturally feeling is the under. We'll look into that in just a second. Pat Bryant also. I mentioned Marvin Mims is out, wide receiver for the Broncos. Last I saw, Pat Bryant, wide receiver for the Broncos, over under receptions was at 1.5. He's gone over that in he's gone over that in 4 out of 6 games this season, in the games in which he was targeted. So, and then once again, the Raiders have allowed the 5th most receptions to wide receivers. Now, would I go with Sutton over the 58.5 receiving yards or Sutton over the 4.5 receptions? I would rather pick Sutton over the 4.5 receptions because he has gone over that line more times this year than he has the receiving yards. He's gone over the 4.5 receptions in 4 out of 8 games this season compared to 3 out of 8. Hold on. That's against the Raiders. My bad. So he's gone over that line in 4 out of 8 career games against the Raiders, the reception line. And then he's only gone over that in 3 out of 8 career games against the Las Vegas Raiders. He went over both of those lines in 2 out of 4 career games against Oakland. So all in all, he's gone over the reception line more than the receiving line in 12 career games against the Raiders. So that's why I'd be leaning more towards the Sutton receptions. And then Franklin's gone. We don't really have much history to work with Franklin here. But, this season, he's gone over the receiving line in 3 out of 9 games, the 44.5 receiving yards, 3 out of 9 games this season compared to getting 5+ receptions in only 2 out of 9 games this season. And then once again, Franklin is that major red zone target for the Broncos. The next guy would be, let's go look. So I know, people are real interested in anytime touchdowns. The next guy is going to be Cortland Sutton with 5 total red zone targets this season, and then Evan Ingram with 4, Harvey with 4. Then it's going to give me red zone rushing statistics. We can go look to see, how many times Denver. J.K. Dobbins, 18 rushing attempts inside the 20 this season compared to R.J. Harvey's 5. Actually, Bo Nix has more red zone rush attempts than R.J. Harvey. So, that's a little concerning about the Harvey anytime touchdown thing. Is Harvey? My guess is he's breaking out for runs, right? When he's getting these touchdowns. My guess is that they're long touchdown runs. So I guess he's only had 2 rushing touchdowns this season, and they were both against Dallas. 40-yard touchdown rush and a 1-yard touchdown rush. And a 5-yard touchdown pass. So he was a big red zone threat in that Cowboys game. And maybe the Broncos are just trying to get him more involved now, That could be it. But yeah, I'm still going to have to go with the Franklin and Harvey as my favorite touchdown scorers in this one. And then I would lean. I think I would like the Pat Bryant over 1.5 receptions, the Franklin over 44.5 receiving yards, and then Sutton over 4.5 receptions. This is where the data is leading me to believe what will happen. And then we talked about Trey Tucker and Tyler Lockett's receptions. I think both of them are worth a look. Good history there. And I just want to mention that although the Raiders have allowed the 8th fewest receiving yards to tight ends this season and the 3rd fewest receptions, Evan Ingram, the tight end for the Broncos, does have a touchdown in 2 out of 3 career games against the Raiders, and he's the 3rd leader in target share on Denver. I feel they will lean on Harvey, possibly keep Nix and Dobbins fresh if they get up early. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. And, I think have the Broncos played on a short week at all yet? No. I mean, they played on a Monday and then a Sunday, and looks like that didn't affect their, at least J.K. Dobbins' production there. But, typically what do teams do? What do the Broncos do? That's what I would be looking up. Like, what are their tendencies whenever they're facing a short week? Do the Broncos just keep going with their original game plan? Do they let guys rest? My instinct is telling me that, the Broncos are going to, like the comment just said, like Tim Armstrong just said, they'll maybe lean on Harvey and these other guys, the other role players, a little bit more than guys like Sutton and J.K. Dobbins if they get up early. Now, something that I had to look at is anytime touchdown for the Broncos defense, right? So the Broncos did have a defensive touchdown in the home game that they played against the Raiders last season, but they didn't get one in that road game. And they've only had one in the last 10 games against the Raiders. I think the odds last I checked were like plus 400 or plus 500 for the Broncos anytime touchdown, defensive anytime touchdown. Instinctively, that's what I feel like is going to happen in this game. But the data just didn't back it up. Only 1 out of the last 10 games against the Raiders. And here's another thing. The Broncos defense hasn't scored a touchdown this season, and the Raiders haven't allowed a team to score a defensive touchdown against them. So in that aspect, you could say, oh, well, they're due. But, I mean, I statistically, it doesn't make sense. But something that makes a little bit more sense, that pays a little bit, that the odds are a little bit bigger, are anytime safety. The last time, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but the last time Geno Smith played the Denver Broncos was in 2024 when he played for Seattle. And in that game, the Seahawks got called for an offensive holding in their own end zone, which resulted in a safety. And then there was another safety that the Broncos scored in that game when they stuffed Charbonnet. I think it was, they were on the 1 yard line and they stuffed Charbonnet. So 2 safeties the Broncos got against Geno in the last time that they played. Also, I had to look at Geno interception. So he has played 4 career games against Denver, and he has thrown an interception in 2 out of 4 of those games. However, in one of those games, he really didn't play any meaningful minutes. So it was really 2 out of 3 career games against Denver that he's thrown an interception. And I have to think he's going to be under some heavy pressure tonight. He's going up against the number 1 sacks per game defensive team with the Denver Broncos. They have the most sacks at anybody per game. And the Raiders, I mentioned this earlier, they rank 21st in sacks allowed per game. So I could see, Gino really being under a lot of pressure tonight. And what else? Oh, I just wanted to say one other thing about the safety. From my understanding, this Denver Broncos punter has a strong leg. And I think what will be required for the Broncos to get into to possibly get a safety on the Raiders this game is if that punter pins them back at the 2-yard line, the 1-yard line. This punter for Denver has the most punts that have gone inside the 20-yard line this season. But I couldn't find, and I really didn't have the time. But if you do, I think if you're thinking about playing the safety prop, I think it'd be really beneficial to look to see how many times this Broncos punter has pinned opposing teams within that 5-yard line. Like I said, he has punted the ball inside the 20 more times than any other punter this season. But I think he's going to need to get it, that 3-yard line, 2-yard line, 1-yard line. They haven't been up heavy in any game this season that I can remember. I'm talking about Denver. Yeah, man. There's only 2 games that they've won by 10 plus points. One was against Cincinnati. One was against Dallas. And I kind of put the Raiders in that category with Cincinnati and Dallas. But they only beat Tennessee by 8 in week 1. There was a London game, right? So that was against the Jets. I mean, I thought the Broncos were gonna roll the Jets in that game. Jets ended up only losing by 2. So, but the Broncos. So I mean, if you consider that a primetime game, which I mean, yeah, it's a primetime game. If it's an overseas London game. They only won by 2, but they did beat Cincinnati on Monday Night Football 28-3 this season as well. So, what else here? I think, we were talking about over-unders, right? The total points scored in this game. I think Tim was asking about or said that he liked. What I'll say is I couldn't remember if he liked the over or under. I think you said the under, right? So the Raiders are 3-5 to the over this season. The Broncos are 3-6. So more times than not, both of these teams are going under that line, whatever it is. And today it's set at 42.5. All right. But let's go take a look real quick. Let's do a couple of calculations here. First, let's just see how many times, because the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders, I'm not talking about the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders have played each other 10 times throughout history. And once again, the Raiders lead the Las Vegas Raiders lead the all-time series 8-2 against the Broncos. Broncos winning the last 2 games. But let's look at how many times that these teams have went over the 42.5 line. 42.5 over under. So how many times have they scored 3 or more points? Not 3 or more, 43 or more points in a game against each other. 1 out of 1, 2 out of 2, 2 out of 3, 2 out of 4, 2 out of 5, 3 out of 6, 3 out of 7, 4 out of 8, 5 out of 9, 6 out of 10 games. So more times than not, throughout these teams' history, 6 out of 10 games have gone over the 42.5 point total. Then we'll also do another thing here. We'll look at points per game in the NFL, and then points per game allowed. NFL. All right. So let's do it for both teams here. So let's take how many points per game the Broncos are scoring at home this season. They've actually scored the fifth most at home per game out of every team in the league. 31.3 points per game at home, Denver. And then we're going to add that with points allowed per game by the Raiders on the road. They've allowed an average of 31.3 points per game allowed on the road, which I don't have to do any math to come up with the answer for that. So the Broncos, just based on that equation alone, Broncos score 31.3 points. And then what did we say it was for the Raiders? It was like 20 something. I've already done this with the Raiders. The Broncos at home have allowed 17.8 points per game. And then like the Raiders have scored, what was it? On the road, the Raiders have scored 12.5. So let's see here. 12.5. The Raiders score on the road, which is third worst in the NFL. Plus the points allowed per game Denver's allowing when they're at home. And then divide that by 2. So I'm thinking the Broncos score 31.3. The Raiders score 15.15. And then you add both of those numbers and you get 46.45 total points in this game, just based on that equation alone, which goes over that 42.5. And like we said, 6 out of 10 games between these two teams have gone over the 42.5. And not just that, but it's concerning to me because with that equation that we just did, the Raiders are projected to score 15.15 points. Okay. But when I'm looking, and I mentioned this earlier, every time that the Raiders have played at Denver, they've scored 17 or more points. They've played at Denver 5 times, and they've scored 17 or more points in each one of those games. I think Ivan was saying that the over-under team total was 16.5. I mean, if history repeats itself here tonight, the Raiders will not score less than 17 points. Naturally, I'm thinking they don't score anything, but I do like to look at this historical data, and something else we can do is see how many times that they've played in Denver. These two teams has it gone over the 42.5 point total, because we did every matchup between these two teams, whether it be in Las Vegas or in Denver. But let's look at just Denver. Their most recent game that they played at Denver, 52 total points were scored. 52, and then 1 out of 1 games in Denver, it's gone over. 1 out of 2 games in Denver, it's gone over. And then 1 out of 3, 2 out of 4, 3 out of 5. So even then, more times than not, it's gone over. The game they were up was Dallas, and that game was the game that Harvey went off. Yep. And that's what I'm kind of thinking tonight too, is, if you think the Broncos are going to run with this one, that makes me like Harvey even more. If you think that the Raiders are going to keep it kind of close, I would be looking more for, Dobbins and Sutton. Dobbins and Sutton if it's close. Franklin and Harvey if it's a large margin of victory. I mean, obviously anything can happen, but statistically that's what sounds pretty solid to me. Just want to go over some other quick notes real quick. The Broncos have allowed the fewest receptions to running backs this season. So if you're thinking about taking a Raider to go over receptions, I just hope that, you get a fair line or a good price. Same with Evan Ingram. The Raiders have done a good job at defending against receiving yards and receptions to tight ends this season. I hope you have good history or have a good line if you're taking Ingram to go over receiving yards and or receptions. Bowers, man, I'm thinking. I mean, that's probably where the Raiders are gonna try to get a bulk of their yards. Like I said, I was talking with my buddy, and we were just kind of just talking with each other. How do you think the Raiders are gonna move the ball today? We're thinking it's gonna have to be Bowers. Is how they're gonna have to pick up a bulk of their yardage. Denver ranks 8th best in rushing yards allowed per game. Denver ranks 6th best in passing yards allowed per game. I mean, the Raiders rank 24th in passing yards per game, 29th in rushing yards per game. So it's a real tall task for the Raiders tonight, man. And if you want to be super contrarian, yeah, the play is the Raiders tonight. Myers, yep. Jacoby Myers being gone. I think that's a big hit for the Raiders offense, So, yeah, Brock Bowers and Trey Tucker, I think, are guys that we got to look at. And then I just want to mention that Trey Tucker has not had a touchdown in 3 career games against Denver. And then Tyler Lockett has had a touchdown in 1 out of 4 career games against Denver. So history is not looking good there. Yeah, I mean, Genty and Bowers, and it just looks like Denver's maybe a little bit more vulnerable to. I can go look real quick. Rushing yards allowed to running backs. Denver ranks 4th, 8th, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15th in rushing yards allowed to running backs. And then receiving yards allowed to tight ends. Denver ranks 3rd, 6th, 9th, 12, 13, 14. They're a little bit more vulnerable compared to other teams in the league at allowing tight end receiving yards than rushing yards to running backs. So, the only thing about Bowers is that he had so many targets and so many receptions in a game that he played, just a few days ago. So, I mean, that's something that we should look at real quick before we get out of here is how many times, has Bowers, let's go see last year. When did he play on a short week last year? Right here. He had 10 targets. He had 10 targets last season against Denver. Only caught 4, but anyways, he had 10 targets, right? Just a few days later, he played that game on a Sunday, and then he had a game that Friday against the Chiefs. So 4 or 5 days after that game against Denver, playing on a short week, and they kept feeding him the ball. 14 targets, 10 receptions, 140 receiving yards, and a touchdown against the Chiefs. So doesn't look like it doesn't look like he cares if he's on a short week or not. They'll keep feeding him the ball. In fact, they fed him the ball even more than what they did against Denver on that Sunday. They fed him the ball even more that Friday against the Chiefs. The Raiders. Yeah, man. I mean, the dogs have been barking on the Thursday night games, and I totally get it. Like, if you guys want to go with the Raiders tonight, I understand. Normally, this is a spot where I would pick the Raiders to cover. But man, when I'm looking at the data, I mean, I just see Broncos have an advantage everywhere. Everywhere they have an advantage, and I'm not going to overthink this one. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I think leading up until this game, I had somebody text me last night. It was Ivan. He's up in the comments. He sent me a message, and he kind of asked who I liked in this game, or he sent me a message about this game, and I sent him back like, yeah, man, I'm thinking the Raiders cover. This was last night. I was like, I think the Raiders cover, but I'm gonna have to look at it again in the morning. I looked at it again this morning, man, and I just can't do it. I can't do it. I'm not overthinking. I know Raiders look so bad, but man, and I thought the Raiders were going to give the Chiefs a little run for their money. Nope. Chiefs blew them out of the water. Made me, I came on here, what was it? Week 7 or so, and I said hot take of the week. The Chiefs are going to lose to the Raiders, and the Chiefs just blew them out of the water. I mean, sometimes what doesn't make sense ends up happening in football, and it seems like it happens more in primetime games like this one. But look, I don't care if the Broncos have me out there as the running back tonight. I think we're winning this one by whatever that line was. 9.5 is last that I saw it was 10 plus points. Me and you, JB, yeah, week 10. You and me can go out there and play with the Broncos and win by 10 plus points tonight. That's how I'm feeling about this one. But sometimes when I feel that good about something, it ends up going the other way. But I really just want to come on here and give you guys my thoughts about this game, the statistics and stuff. I don't think that the NFL is rigged, okay? I know there are people that think the NFL is rigged, and you may be right, you may be wrong. I'm not here to argue about that with you. But what I'm here to say is that let's go ahead and say you're right. Let's go ahead and say you're right. Once again, I'm not saying that you're right or wrong. But let's say that the NFL is rigged. This game right here, I mean, even if it is rigged, if the Broncos don't win this game by 10 plus points, I think it just explode. It makes it almost too obvious that it is rigged. And the NFL's been it feels like they've been under a little bit of fire this season with that stuff. So, I think they'll play, let's say it is rigged, right? I think they'd play it cool and let the Broncos take care of business in this one. If it was rigged, once again, I don't think it is, and I'm not saying it is. And if you do, we all have our own opinions on that. I'm not here to debate that with you. But I'm just saying that even if it is, I think I don't see any way the Raiders compete in this one. Hey, yeah, thank you, Tim. Appreciate that, man. Anyways, yeah, I think that about does it here. My final score prediction. So, statistically, I got this game going over. Naturally, I got this game going under. So I'm staying away from it. Usually I got to have my feelings and the statistics coincide with each other for me to make a pick. But, my feelings are telling me Denver about the spread. The statistics are telling me Denver about the spread. I mean, how many times have the Broncos? Oh, we've already kind of looked at that. 17-14 Raiders, says Not Move Podcast, JB. JB, you've been pretty good at when it comes to like the AFC West stuff. So, but I'm gonna go with 31-13 Denver. 31-13. Denver wins this game. What do you guys think? If you guys are still in the building, what do you guys think down in the comments? Tim says 24-10 Broncos. I think that's a solid prediction, man. My buddy and I were talking about this earlier. One of the final scores that I predicted, I gave out 3. One of the other ones that I gave out was 27-10. So it's right there. I'm right there with you, Tim. Follow. Here we go. Follow at 4th and John for any interest in Eagles conversations. Absolutely, man. Let's get Tim out there on the big screen there. Let's go give him a follow, guys, if you're interested in those Eagle conversations. I've actually seen some videos that Tim does on social media, and they're entertaining. So I would definitely go check out his content. But yeah, I think that about does it here. I'd like to say thank you to the followers, supporters, subscribers. We really appreciate you guys here at the Not Move podcast. Also, a special thanks to our sponsors, BetUS, MyBookie.ag, Walmart.com, Open Goal, the MLB, and NFL Pro Shops. Also, I tell you guys time and time again that I'm very selective on what I like to play, and I only like to play singles. I'm not a fan of parlays, but I know a guy that is. Southgate's parlays, $15 per day, $49.99 per week. I hear he's pretty good at what he does. Now, personally, I haven't tried his services, but just really because I'm not interested in the parlays. But if you are, that option is available. If you scan that QR code at the top left-hand corner of the screen, should take you to where you get. Yeah, absolutely, Tim. Thanks for joining in the comments today. Oh, $9.99 per day. Okay. So $9.99 per day. Is it still $49.99 per week? Not Move podcast. So once again, I haven't tried it out, and I'm not big on the parlays, but I know a lot of you are, and some of you may not have the time to watch these shows and do a lot of research, but that option's available with Southgate, and he just gives you the picks. I think he sends. Tim says Southgate has solid plays and is consistent. So, I used to sell sports picks. The reason why I don't anymore is because I want to be able to get on here and talk with you guys about everything and anything. When I was selling picks, I was limited on the information that I could talk about on the air. So I would much rather just be able to talk freely than to walk on eggshells. There were some other reasons that went into it, but yeah, my style is just real selective, singles, no parlays, but I know a lot of people do like those parlays, and yeah, that option is available. So once again, if you scan that QR code, it should take you to where you need to be. Just scroll down that page a little bit, and once again, thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for the engagement in chat, and we will see you guys real soon. There's only one NBA game on tonight. Before I get out of here, there's only one NBA game on tonight. Clippers and Suns. I'm not going to break down that game. Friday, tomorrow, we have the NBA group play. I'm not a big fan of the group play, but if I get eager, I'll come on here and talk about those games for Friday. Saturday, it seems like we got a pretty nice slate in the NBA. Sunday, a decent slate. I know we got a lot of football on Sunday. I do plan on doing a show Sunday morning for the NFL, but I might have to do an episode with that London game on Saturday. We got a game in Berlin, a game in Berlin, which that's in Germany. It's the Falcons at Colts at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, Sunday morning, November 9th. So I'll probably put out a video on Saturday covering that game. But anyways, enough of all of that. Thank you guys again for your time, and have a great day. Not moved out.
This non-casual podcast may not be reproduced, retransmitted, or reused without the authorized written consent of the Not Moved Podcast Network. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed today's broadcast.